Welcome everyone to the Ask the Author session on forging links, unblocking transport with blockchain. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Ask the Author is kind of a pithy format where we have 30 minutes to present you with the key findings of ITF reports and give you the opportunity to ask questions to the author or the authors. And I'm delighted to have with me today Katja Schechtner, who's the lead author of this report, who used to work at ITF, is now at the MIT in Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Andrew Lombardi, who's one of the co-authors, who also used to be with ITF and is now with the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship. Welcome to both of you. I'm not going to start to explain what blockchain is. I assume that if you're interested in this topic, you have a rough idea of what it is, but you may be interested in what the applications for transport are. And that is what we're going to look at today. Are distributed ledger technologies relevant for transport? If so, where are they useful and how can they be made most useful? And Katja will present to us the key findings in a moment, and will be available together with Andrew for the Q&A. I just want to do a few kind of housekeeping remarks, which is, if you want to ask questions, please type them in the Q&A. At the bottom of the screen, you have a little icon Q&A with a bubble, two bubbles. Type them in there and I'll pick them up and pose them to the authors in our Q&A after the presentation. The second housekeeping remark is, towards the end, you will see a poll question popping up on your screen. I'll give you the heads up then. We really just want to ask you whether you found this useful or not, and whether you'd be interested to come again. This will help us to kind of optimize our service to you, our readers and stakeholders and partners. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Katja to take us through the key findings of forging links, unblocking transport with blockchain. Katja.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's a pleasure to be reunited with my former colleagues at the OECD and the International Transport Forum today. And as I've seen some of you who have registered for this talk today, I've interacted with when we developed this report, and it's a big pleasure to have you with us today. Now, why did we provide this report? Why did we do the research, and why did we structure it the way we did? Now, the way we approached it is not to look at the technology basics of blockchain or other distributed ledger technologies, but to understand how they could help us for some very specific transport questions like safety, the efficiency of logistic chains, fraud issues, data privacy. Could their competing goals be helped by working with the blockchain or DLTs? Consumer protection, as you'll see, I'll stress that in an example I'll show, or sustainable transportation options, moving people towards those. And therefore, and I think this is the most value and the one takeaway that you can from this talk is we have looked deeply but concisely into 8 use cases from supply chains, logistics, and multimodal passenger trips to make DLTs tangible for transport policymakers. So if you're from a particular industry, or if a certain problem, challenge itches you, you might find how DLTs can help you in this. I'll show what we've tackled in this way. And then to go one step further, we of course also made more general level recommendations on how you could move forward in your industries, with whom to connect, and how you could take the biggest benefit out of DLTs for your own work. The 4 supply chain cases that we tackled was streamlining payout for the shipping industry, fighting fraud in the car industry, and then a decentralized last marketplace, especially think of how we all had to rely on delivery services and the issues they create with congestion and sustainability in cities, as well as workers' rights. This is the case if you want to look at that question from a transport policy background and how DLTs can help you in this. And then a specific use case where we love to be able to show two new different technologies coming together was cutting pollution through fuel quality tracking. We focused on bunker fuels for the shipping industry and combined the technology of artificial DNA and blockchains used for one very specific policy purpose, like to monitor the fuel quality. However, what I will not do is go into all of those cases, but I want to show you the impact of one. Now, we've selected fighting fraud in the car industry. Now, the real world problem in the car industry here is that we have odometer fraud and fake car parts. Odometer, if you don't familiar with the term or the sensor, is what counts how far your car is going, how many kilometers it's run. And this has particularly been opened to tampering, especially since a lot of those distance counters have been digitized. To give you a number, more than 33% of used car sales in Germany suffer from some tampering with odometers, which results in 3,000 euros loss per person if you do a used car sale in Germany. And believe me, the 33% in Germany is the lowest number of fraud that was estimated or counted by regulation authorities. Another challenge and a big problem is fake car parts. There's an enormous amount of loss in the numbers there too, but what's even worse is that more than 20% of car crashes in India can be linked to fake car parts. So the challenge is how to prevent tampering with car history, create a single database with access for all parties that respects privacy on one hand and also is not too data heavy. And this is exactly where DLTs can come in by creating a digital twin of the car. So all the parts that you have on a car, a digital twin on the blockchain that records all events, like when you had your car serviced, when it was sold, when a new part was introduced, whatever there happened. This creates a full tamper-proof history through the very specific way blockchains or DLTs are set up. And you can also make this a controlled and permissioned access so that not everybody can follow the car, the history of your car, but only those parties that have been given a certain amount of permission. Might that be where you have your car serviced? Might that be the regulatory authorities to focus on that, or whoever wants to sell the car? It's a lovely example how DLTs can help both the regulatory authorities, but also be very tangible in immediate consumer protection and benefits. We have also 4 more use cases for passenger mobility. In this, we focused very much on the potentials of mobility as a service and its connections to blockchains, especially how to make a neutral platform possible. We also had a wonderful example for peer-to-peer ride-hailing. We there used an example from Korea. And if you were wondering if blockchain and DLTs have been used before or are actually playing a role in transportation, in Korea, the company that's running a peer-to-peer transport system, Tada, has now 200,000 users and 27,000 drivers in Singapore using this blockchain-based peer-to-peer ride-hailing, and it enabled them to gain competitive market advantage in Vietnam, in Phnom Penh and Cambodia, because it helped getting the fees that the drivers have to pay, the commission fees, down. Finally, to more use cases, one from the aviation industry, especially baggage tracking or other consumer enforcement issues, and micropayments. Again, here, I've chosen one example to dig a little bit deeper in, and this is making neutral mobility as a service platforms a reality. Now, if you have ever worked in urban transportation, you are very well aware how difficult it is to get competing mobility providers to serve one client in a single journey on one platform. The challenge is that the customer purchases one single ticket for a journey that includes buses, trains, maybe a micromobility provider and an e-scooter. And how can we ensure that those competitors can share data and also immediately allocate the revenue and the liability to the provider that was most affected, or who and automatically execute the agreements of who gets what part of the revenue from one trip, from one passenger. And it also allows you to include your own promotions in a mobility as a service platform without your competitors necessarily gaining these data insights on what you're doing and how much revenue that's generating for you. This is what's possible if you implement a clever DLT blockchain system. So you can facilitate secure data sharing with an open permission blockchain. You can enforce agreements and immediately auto-execute payouts through smart contracts, and create a neutral data ecosystem through the decentralization. Now, immediate and auto-execute payouts is still a little bit of an issue because instant payment, the blockchain is a bit too clumsy for that, but we are currently working on this in many ways, not only in the transport industry, but very much in the payment industry and in the finance industry, and we can see some progress there. Out of those examples that we try to make as approachable, as tangible for transport policymakers or the general interested audience, we've then derived some higher level recommendations that I'll show you now. One and for all with all technologies is make regulations more flexible. For this, a lovely tool is regulatory sandboxes to promote innovation while minimizing risk. If you're not totally sure what a regulatory sandbox is, we are happy to explain later, or you can look it up. It's very nicely described on OECD's overall future technology and innovation for transport policymakers, websites and insights. And you should actively engage with the transport industry initiatives around DLTs to quickly learn and also to make sure they do not monopolize or implement things that you probably wouldn't want to see. We also suggest to require some level of open data access for transport applications of DLTs. How you can do that or where you can look at that, you can already look at some of LA's way to ask for LA in the US, so Los Angeles, how they do their open data requirements in the wider transportation system, make transport policies machine readable, and run pilot projects. So you can identify those use cases that will benefit the public sector and your interests from your regulation and government authorities the most. And with this, I'm nearly at the end. I just wanted to say that what we've shown here in this report is part of a wider and ongoing data, artificial intelligence and related tech workstream at the ITF under the overall framework of the Corporate Partnership Board. Corporate Partnership Board projects are designed to enrich policy discussion with a business perspective and try to be really on top of the latest topics that emerge in the transportation sector. And I think today Sharon Masterson, who's managing the Corporate Partnership Board, is with us today as well. I've just put up two publications there that are very recent. The one preceding this one is Blockchain and Beyond, Encoding 21st Century Transport. And another one looking at wider questions is How to Govern Transport in the Algorithmic Age. And with this, let me say a big thank you to the team at ITF who made this possible, especially as Andrew and I have moved on. There is Philippe Christ, who is your first point of approach if you have any further questions on what the ITF is doing in this whole data, DLT, and blockchain stream. And I think he's with us here today as well. So with that, not much further ado, I know I ran through what we had to show and what we did and offered you a short glimpse. I think we are ready for the major part of this, which is ask the author questions, and happy to answer your questions together with Andrew, who's been instrumental at getting this report out the door in time. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Katja. That was hugely interesting. And personally, I must say, I'm most interested in the baggage tracking solution, something which I've wished for many times. Anyway, if you have questions, now's the time to throw them over to me by putting them in the Q&A. And I have one here from Ralph Brand, who's a consultant, I think from Germany. And he has an interesting question, which is, about the energy amount that blockchain uses. So assuming that we have sort of perfect transport solutions with baggage tracing and with mobility as a service, all this, would this not cost a huge amount of energy, and in the end may eat up the efficiencies that we create through it in terms of sustainable mobility, for example? Katja, is that something you want to answer?
Yes, if you're comfortable, I'd answer this question. Thank you very much for these questions. There is usually two questions you get if you work in the data space. One is privacy. Now that is something that DLT and blockchain addresses. And then there's the energy question. You are right. The way the original blockchains were set up, the huge energy consumption because of the very difficult math calculations that had to be done on fast-running computers was a big part of how we can make DLTs secure and in the system. And you're very right that this remains a problem. However, there is really a lot of research going on how to improve this, on how to be lighter on the energy consumption of the specific math problems we try to use. We also have different opportunities by creating not only public permissionless platforms or blockchains, but actually just minimize the data exchange or who performs these calculations and who authenticates them. So this is an open question, but it should not be overly stressed in this area. Not that it doesn't have to be solved, but it is something that can be technically solved.
More questions are coming in, but I'll take the opportunity to throw in one of my own because I'm really curious. Maybe this is one that Andrew can answer. So the idea behind blockchain, I believe, is that the information is immutable; it cannot be changed. But what happens if wrong information gets entered into the blockchain?
So this kind of ties in actually to the previous question. I'll just remark quickly on the previous question. There's actually a section in the report that talks about the trilemma problem, which is basically a trade-off between decentralization or centralization, security, and the speed. And speed, we can kind of include computing power. So the more decentralized the ledger is, the more secure it is, but the more computing power it takes. And that also is relevant to the immutability question. So with immutability, sorry, I'm having a little trouble here. 1 second, please. I'm having a little trouble with my connection.
We can hear you loud and clear. We can hear you loud and clear. Okay. I'll jump to the next question, which comes from Victor Krikorian from Missionary, I believe, who asks about regulation, which is what ITF is about. And he'd like to know at what level this kind of DLT solutions in the mobility sector should be managed. Was that national regulation? Do we need international standards? Or is this even something which can be done on a local level, on city level, for example, Katja?
Thanks, and thanks, Michelin, for the question. You have been very active in the past, also supporting us in understanding what the process and the thought process and the implementation process in the transport industry is. Now, the short answer is we don't know yet. This is such a new technology that did not exactly come from the idea to give more oversight to states and public authorities, but exactly to take that away from it. So nevertheless, over the last few years, specific in the national bank sector, in the central bank digital currencies, and in the finance sector, we've seen moving on and understanding how regulations, governments, and the public can together benefit from this technology. I think the question how we will solve it in the particular area of DLTs is similar to the way we are currently discussing it in the wider algorithm and AI space. To some level, it is a bit with all digitalization topics. You will have an international guidance and a national authority that looks at many different questions, but you will have to have the knowledge, like you have it about sensors in every sector. So the health sector needs to be to talk and think about it and how to regulate it for its particular questions, similar to the transport sector, but they all can benefit from an overlying idea and regulation that binds into other questions on data sharing requirements, on privacy requirements, and others. And for more on this, I think the report that I showed on transport governance in the algorithmic age might give you a more detailed answer on what to regulate and at what level. And I think Philippe is a perfect person to address for those questions in more detail as well.
Katja, I just want to quickly go back to Andrew, who's with us again, to maybe sum up his thoughts on that question of immutability and what happens if wrong information gets entered.
Sure, thank you about that. So with immutability, it's not exactly immutable. There are options to update the blockchain or the DLT. The only challenge is it depends a lot on the centralization. So the more centralized the DLT is, the easier it is to find consensus among a smaller group that know each other. But the more true blockchain it is, the more decentralized it is, the more things get stuck on there. The good news there is you can overwrite or update something. So you can add a second smart contract that can say, actually, the previous one was incorrect, but you can't erase anything. So that's the best short answer on that.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question here from an anonymous participant is, what are the biggest barriers you see for implementing blockchain technologies in urban transport, but also in freight and in non-urban transport, so different kind of regional and sectoral areas?
So from my perspective, the biggest barrier currently is the unfamiliarity of those affected or who can potentially benefit from implementing this technology with it, and a bit of a shyness or apprehension towards this technology, especially as I'm afraid, I'm honest, it's not something that you understand by reading a two-pager. So that is one of the biggest barriers that I currently see, and also, like, in many ways, regulation authorities not having too many people and too many resources to be able to interact and ask the technology or the nerds the right questions. So this is one big thing. And the other thing is it is an emerging technology, which means, and that costs money. So the upfront investment, and especially getting the different parties on board, is a certain amount of investment. And technically you can shy away from this investment if the whole industry is moving that much, which is exactly why we recommend to think and implement pilot strategy, pilot projects that have a use case that's actually really beneficial for you, In the urban space, I've shown the MAS system. There's also this micropayment system that can help shape behavior, as well as the peer-to-peer logistics service, which is a hub and spoke, or no, a distributed delivery service mechanism with smart contracts. So this is in the urban space, and in the more wider and regional space, there's basically other use cases I've been showing you, including international transportation and travel in the flight industry or in the shipping industry. But the biggest barrier is still which is something that we try to help with, especially in this ITF report, is to familiarize yourself with the technology, understand it's a bit complicated, but actually not too complicated overall, and that it has huge benefits and that you can actually leverage them. And the industry is taking it up already. So you can actually, you find partners in the industry that you can interact with.
Thank you, Katja. I have a question from Salvador Saavedra, who asks, is interested in your point about car fraud, odometer fraud. Are there averages, estimations on the kind of manipulations, interventions that happen there? And which countries do you have data for there?
Andrew, would you like to take this? Because you've worked a lot on this project and I know you were excited, or would you like me to take that?
I can just answer a bit, and Katja, you can fill in anything I forget. So as far as countries, we looked at a few specifically in Europe. Basically, we used the countries that we could find data on, where odometer fraud data was available. And so in the case study, we talked mostly about Europe, but I think Katja also referenced some data we had in India, which is not exactly about odometer fraud, but more about parts. So the focus, though, was predominantly, I believe, in Europe in the case study.
Yeah, so if you look at the report, I don't know exactly now what source we have. We have a few sources, but the 33% I've gave you from Germany was the lowest number. I know we had numbers from the Czech Republic, but in Italy, it's already 50% of odometer tampering that we can see. And there is studies out there, and you find the link. And as always, every ITF report has a substantial bibliography attached to it that is meticulously checked by a wonderful communications team. So you should find it with one click and link there.
Thanks. I just shared the link onto the algorithmic governance report in the chat. So if you want to look that up, it's really very, very fascinating stuff. And by the way, I own a car with an odometer issue. I know all about it. Here's a question from Oliver Garrett-Jones, who's an OECD colleague, who asks, what did you find was the issue with payments on the blockchain for transport? Can these be addressed by the use of digitally native currencies, cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currency? So the money side of it all in transport. Katja.
We really didn't prepare this question, but I've recently been appointed on the board of the Austrian National Bank's payment and financial innovation systems, because this is a problem that we see in many cases, not only in transportation, and that needs to be addressed now. So it's my feeling that this will be more and overall addressed by, let's say, the central banks and the central bank digital currency initiatives and other things, that will come from the transport sector. I see very good movement there. I see a lot of understanding in this area, in the finance, fintech industry. And if you want to know more and read more about that, I think we don't have it on our fingertips, but Carolyn Malcolm, who heads the Global Blockchain Policy Initiative of the OECD, has run several work, talk, and report streams on this that you can also find on the OECD homepage if you're looking for that. Oh, you're a colleague, so you can probably ask Caroline directly. Sorry, yeah. Right.
I see no further questions. If you still want to ask questions, now is the time. We're running against half the hour. We can run a little over if we have things to talk about. But I find this fascinating. I have one question, and this is about something that appeared in your presentation, and it's kind of a buzzword: smart contracts. Everything's smart today. Cities are smart, cars are smart, heating systems are smart. Contracts are now also smart. What does smart contract mean in the context of blockchain and distributed ledgers and transport. Andrew, do you want to maybe?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. So smart contracts in general is an opportunity to create a peer-to-peer direct contract and cut out the third party that's usually required to negotiate or resolve exchange between two parties. So it's usually, in the case of DLTs, triggered by a certain set of requirements being met. So a scan of a barcode or a proper reading of a sensor, a proper entry of data. And that usually can result in the release of certain information, whether it's a payment or data required from another user. I don't know if Katja maybe wants to add.
There is many questions that are related to smart contracts. The one thing that maybe should stick in your mind is that it can automatically execute something. So once something has been done, it can automatically execute the next step without needing any intermediary between, which incredibly cuts costs, which is the reason why we've been thinking in the transport industry, as you will well be aware, how many people handle information about a good transported is very much interested in it. As you can see in the Trade Lands project that was first initiated by Maersk together with IPM, and that now many shipping providers companies have joined.
I'll just add real quickly, the big thing to keep in mind is that it can cut out unnecessary reliance on a third party. So it's mentioned in different contexts throughout the case studies. The peer-to-peer ride-sharing one, the idea is that basically some ride-share companies, their main function in matching riders and drivers is the finder's fee to running the data system in the app that connects them. And something like DLT or blockchain could allow a rider to enter a smart contract, like a request on the app, and then it's responded to by a driver directly, automatically, based on some algorithm when everything matches up. And then it's basically cheaper for the rider and a greater share of the profits go to the driver. Another example is just the smart sensors. I think this is in the fourth case study on freight cargo section about smart contracts can basically be matched up with smart sensors, which read something like emissions levels from a cargo ship or the temperatures on a container to make sure that they're in regulation throughout a journey, because you can set those regulations, but they're very hard to enforce. So smart contracts can also help cut down on the difficulty of enforcement.
Great, thanks. I have a list of many more questions. I have the advantage that I know you, I can just give you a call. Also, I probably have more questions than the others here in the room because I'm not an expert. You will see on your screen in a second a polling question. Oh, that is. Please let us know whether you found this useful or not as we come to the end of today's Ask the Author on blockchain and transport. We really appreciate your time. We don't want to keep you for very long. This is kind of a taste. Go to the website, download the report, have a look, come back to us with more questions or ideas. We also see this as an opportunity to, kind of plant seeds for cooperation, for discussions, to enrich our own knowledge and help you with your issues. So thanks for reaching out to us. Thanks for coming. We will share with you the link to the video on demand so you can watch it again if you missed something, or you can share it with colleagues who might be interested. That would be great. And we hope to see you again the next Ask the Author. I don't think there's one scheduled right now for this week or next week, but you will hear about that. If you don't receive our emails, go to our website and click on the envelope on the right hand top corner, and you can subscribe to updates to hear about when things like this event happen. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Katja and to Andrew for preparing this and sharing their insights with us, and wish you all a happy evening, a good lunch break, or wherever you are, in which time zone you are. Great to have you here, and hope to see you again. Bye-bye.